Earlier in the show, Ryan made the point that Elon Musk is very intentionally using the word revolution for what is happening here in Washington, D.C., just in the early weeks of the second Donald Trump administration. And indeed, one of the goals of the Reagan Revolution may be realized by the Trump Revolution. We can put C1 on the screen. This is a post from Jeff Mason of the Associated Press, who reported a White House official says Trump will take steps later this month to fulfill a campaign promise to defund the Department of Education. Now, Trump was asked a bit about whether the Department of Education will shutter in the Oval Office yesterday. Let's take a listen here.
And on the Education Department, why nominate Linda McMahon to be the Education Department Secretary if you're going to get rid of the Education Department?
Because I told Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job. I want her to put herself out of a job. Education Department. So we're ranked number 40 out of 40 schools, right? We're ranked number 1 in cost per pupil. So we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world. And we're ranked at the bottom of the list. We're ranked very badly. And what I want to do is let the states run schools. I believe strongly in school choice. But in addition to that, I want the states to run schools. And I want Linda to put herself out of a job.
Do you think that's something you can do with an executive order, or are you going to ask Congress to do it?
I would like to be able to. Look, if I could give the schools back to Iowa and Idaho and Indiana and all these places that run properly, there's many of them.
Now, of course, when Ronald Reagan took office, the Department of Education was not even really a decade old. It was something that was brought into existence by Jimmy Carter. And Reagan said the exact same thing about his first Secretary of Education, that he wanted Secretary Bell to put himself out of a job. So this is C3. More Perfect Union noted picked up on a Musk comment that looked back to Reagan, said actually that Musk is now saying Reagan campaigned on ending the department and Trump will succeed where Reagan failed. That was a criticism that was floated of Ronald Reagan during his administration from some people on the right, that he didn't end up shutting down the Department of Education. He couldn't really get Congress's buy-in. And Donald Trump might be in a position now where you look at what happened with USAID, or what is happening right now with USAID. One of the ways they may be skirting Congress is just by, quote, restructuring it and paring it back to something very small under the auspices of the State Department. So it's not shut down in a case like that. It's just been restructured to the point where it's tiny. Let's take a listen to how Ronald Reagan talked about this early in his presidency. We can roll this clip.
We propose to dismantle 2 cabinet departments, Energy and Education. Both secretaries are wholly in accord with this. Some of the activities in both of these departments will, of course, be continued either independently or in other areas of government. There's only one way to shrink the size and cost of big government, and that is by eliminating agencies that are not needed and are getting in the way of a solution. Now, we don't need an energy department to solve our basic energy problem. As long as we let the forces of the marketplace work without undue interference, the ingenuity of consumers, business, producers, and inventors will do that for us. Similarly, education is the principal responsibility of local school systems, teachers, parents, citizen boards, and state governments. By eliminating the Department of Education less than 2 years after it was created, we can not only reduce the budget, but ensure that local needs and preferences, rather than the wishes of Washington, determine the education of our children.
Yeah, so you note there he was mentioning the Department of Education was like 2 years old because it was something that Jimmy Carter brought into existence and at the time was new. Obviously now it has been around for decades, so it's quite a different task to sort of wind down the Department of Education. Ryan, in disclosure, I will say that's something that I'm generally supportive of, with one caveat, which is you need a significant off-ramp. So if you have this idea about sending education back to the states, I mean, Trump is absolutely right about the disconnect between the amount of money we spend on students and the outcomes. It is shameful and pathetic that this is what it looks like. This is how much money we spend, and these are the outcomes that we get per student. It's awful. But if there is no off-ramp to kind of helping the states retake control of education and make up ground, whether it's money or resources that the federal government had previously provided, and it's just kind of a quick severing of the ties, that is not great either. So, this is a significant question about everything that Elon Musk is doing, is whether, it's worth it to just, from even like an ideological conservative perspective, toss a hand grenade into everything, let the chips fall where they may, and say, it's okay, we'll pick up the pieces later. Probably not.
Yeah, and Trump and Musk are both not well known for their kind of well thought out and smooth transitionary policies. Like, these are much more hand grenade people. I think it's worth contextualizing this as quickly as we can, and you could probably do this better than me, but the fight over public education has been kind of central to our politics over the last 150 years. Like, as the progressive era boomed, that was really the advent of the idea of public education, and the idea that every student had a right to a free public education, in their community, free as in funded, though of course by taxpayers. That ran headlong into the religious institutions, which Christian churches had been the ones that had run most of the kind of private schools up until that time, and the Betsy DeVos Dominionist types, very much argued that the public school had, unfortunately, from their perspective, replaced the church as the central social organizing tool in communities.
Or the family as well. Yeah.
And to some degree the family, that because from their perspective, you need the church to support the family. And so where it used to be, people would go to church on Sundays and there'd be potlucks and everybody's kind of ethics and social lives would flow through the local churches. Now potlucks would be organized, they'd be fundraisers for the school, or there'd be bingo night at the school, or everybody would go on Friday night to watch the teams play. And certainly I've seen it in my own life with kids in elementary and middle school, the social fabric of the community does actually, organize itself around the public schools. But so that's the higher level, and the mid-level one is, of course, it's integration with desegregation and the civil rights movement. That inherent in this idea that you'd have private schools was the idea that you could have racial segregation. And after Brown v. Board of Education, you have all these different efforts to keep schools segregated despite the laws. Fights that are still going on during the Carter years. Carter, sicked the IRS on Christian private schools, right, during his term, and my understanding is that it was that, and there was some desegregation element to that fight, that so not only are you guys furthering segregation, you're getting involved in politics, you're no longer really tax exempt organizations. Mm-hmm. So he sends the IRS after these schools. And that, in my understanding, I'm curious if you're taking this, really was the gasoline that kicked off the kind of right-wing evangelical movement. That once Carter came after the private schools, that sent them wild, and it helps to explain Reagan coming in. He's coming at both things at once, and segregation, Brown v. Board of Education, and also this what they see as this attack on the Christian society, and replacing it with this godless public education.
I would say there is also, though, a more charitable interpretation, which is this was in the midst of a pretty rapid federalization of a lot of things that hadn't been federalized for many years, and that includes absolutely civil rights. We didn't have, prior to the Civil Rights Act in the early to mid 1960s, this sort of federal hand in local private businesses. And, there are a lot of conservatives who will still argue, Rand Paul among them, against, ideologically against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the subsequent civil rights legislation, in the same way that Barry Goldwater did. And Reagan really comes out of the Barry Goldwater movement. And most of the sort of people that staffed the Reagan administration and the campaign came out of that movement. And there was tension. There's no question about it. There was always a lot of tension about it. But this was this sort of ideological, I don't know, like shock to the conservative mind that suddenly for a extraordinarily just and important cause, which was civil rights. And it's kind of what happens with the Southern strategy. Like it's sort of how things end up flipping. And George Wallace comes along and all of that. You have conservatives, some reacting by saying this is going to put us in trouble down the road. This like civil rights administration that's rapidly being federalized from the Department of Education was one of the focal points for conservatives by saying, now you have the federal government with sort of its hands in every local school district, and that sounds great on paper, and it will backfire immensely eventually. And a lot of conservatives have looked at like the last 5-10 years in education and said this is kind of what everyone had always been talking about. Christopher Caldwell wrote a book called The Age of Entitlements back in, I think it came out like in 2016, saying it's kind of making a like Goldwater is right argument all along. But no, I mean, I think the tension was between the conservative ideologues who, from a charitable perspective, just had this very deep revulsion to the idea of the federal government within a period of 20 years suddenly taking over so much from local control, and then people who actually were segregationists and racists. And that was significant tension. The Department of Education was very much the center of that.
And so the reason Reagan failed is that you need Congress to get rid of the Department of Education because the Education Department is congressionally authorized and appropriated by Congress. So there are rules. This is not Vietnam. And so Trump, the reporting is that Trump's executive order is going to move elements of the Education Department that are not legally required to be under it elsewhere. And then, and as we talked about in the last block, he's going to push the Impoundment Control Act powers as far as he can, and perhaps just defund different programs, which according to the current law would be illegal. Whether the courts let him get away with it is a different question. And if Elon Musk's hackers can like hide that you're even doing it, then who knows? Now, there are also significant laws on the books that people will notice if he's breaking them. So I think there are roughly, one of them is called IDEA, like Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. This and a lot of viewers are probably familiar with it because they interact with it. It is the federal law that says that public schools are required to teach and to basically cater to children who have disabilities. It's special education or different types of contingencies that they would be offered within mainstream classrooms. Something like 15 million students currently have protections under this law, and this can be a spectrum. This can go from you can have extra time to take a test because you have ADHD, all the way to significant interventions in a special education classroom, or even funding to go to a school if the public school, it's a private school if the public school is not equipped to handle it. So you're running headlong. If you go after that, you're running headlong into many millions of people who are currently, 15 million kids. That's 30 million parents. That's 50 million aunts and uncles.
Yeah.
You're running headlong into that. Then, of course, there is Pell Grants, other financial aid for college. That is required by law. Now, can you move that under somewhere else? Then you have student loan repayments.
Yep.
Like Biden, people may not have noticed, was not allowed. People did notice that he was not allowed by the Supreme Court to kind of restructure and forgive some significant number of student loan debts. But what he did do is set up this repayment schedule that makes it actually genuinely affordable for people who are in enormous amounts of debt. It caps what you owe the amount of income you have. Like they're trying to make it a fair system. If you have a huge amount of debt, but you have a small amount of income, then you owe this much smaller amount of money until, and when your ship comes in, then you owe us more. Like that's how a decent society kind of ought to be organized. If you get rid of the education department, then who's collecting these loans? Who is implementing these programs? Do people just stop paying their loans? No, I doubt. That's highly unlikely. That would be incredibly ironic if the Supreme Court is like, no, you can't do this student loan payment policy, but yeah, you can actually go ahead and just get rid of the entire education department. That wouldn't necessarily put it past them, but it would be certainly the height of irony. Somebody joked on Twitter like, let me get this right. So to do progressive legislation, you need 60 votes. To do national conservatism, you don't need any votes at all. It's like that's the. just so we're clear on the different rules that apply here.
Well, it is kind of what's funny in all of this, to the extent we can find humor, is that conservatives were saying part of the problem with federalizing all of this is that at one point someone can just come in and flip a switch because it's so centralized.
And Elon Musk's boys have found the switches.
They're looking for them, the quote MAGA chuds, as Lomas said on Twitter. So there is I should say, just as we were talking, I pulled up the Project 2025 Education Department plan.
Which, by the way, they assured us had nothing to do with Trump and would definitely not be implemented in any way.
Which we
reported was a total lie. And
yes, we covered that.
So if you watch this show, you're not surprised by any of this.
No, not at all. We covered that extensively. And in fact, that was a huge part of my conversation with Ezra Klein. It was like, they're, of course, going to be using Project 2025.
Yeah, they got nothing else.
Hello.
This is their plan.
Now, that is to say, Trump still had nothing to do with Project 2025. He wouldn't really care. He would spend 10 seconds reading what I'm looking at right now, and he'd be like, it sounds good.
He's not reading a PDF.
No. But they do have, a lot of this is kind of off-ramp type stuff. So, for example, restore revenue responsibility for Title I funding to the states over a 10-year period. If you're trying to conceptualize, as I am, what this would mean for your community, your local school immediately if it were to happen. The plan in Project 2025, which I'm sure is something that's on the desks of people in Linda McMahon's circles and Elon Musk's circles, because frankly, it was a MAGA-friendly conservative plan that people put a lot of time into. It does look like it's significantly off-ramping things and not immediately cutting them, but we'll have to, I actually think we might be able to get the person who wrote this to talk to us.
Yeah, so good.
We'll take a look.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we can also put up C5 here, which is early indications from Patty Murray, who would be the senator who kind of oversees this on the Democratic side. She's hearing that the Doggy Committee people have gone in, DOJ Committee people have gone into Veterans Affairs now and are thumbing through all of the kind of information around those payments. Now, the VA is in desperate need of reform. Veterans' medical records are not in desperate need of DOJ Committee people thumbing through them. So this is something people are going to keep an eye on too, because these are fragile and sensitive systems. And by the separately and actually relatedly, Musk is out here, if you haven't noticed, accusing everyone he sees on his website of breaking the law. He accused Ilhan Omar the other day of breaking the law because she was giving general advice to people here illegally about how to not incriminate yourself. Be like saying that it's illegal to tell somebody about their Fifth Amendment rights. It is specifically illegal to aid a specific individual person here illegally. That actually is a crime. But giving general advice is a First Amendment protected act. So anyway, and then anybody who says something mean about the Doggy Committee, he says you're breaking the law. He should check. There are the federal books are filled with laws around privacy and record protections that he and his DOJ boys seem to be breaking at a just absolutely relentless clip.
A lot of this is going to be tested in the courts. and already is to some extent. But we'll see if some of it ends up getting rolled back. But his status as a special government employee, which is what the White House says he's taken on. If you go read the Justice Department's outlined restrictions for somebody who is a special government employee, unless Elon Musk takes very quick and significant steps to deal with his financial conflicts, he's in flagrant violation or gets some type of special waiver for them, which as yet he doesn't have. He may be able to get that in quick order now that Pam Bondi has been confirmed, but it's impossible to see how what he's doing sort of fits within those boundaries.
Oh yeah, it doesn't. I mean, which he called it a revolution. And so if the revolution fails, like if you come at the king and you miss, you actually, in this country, you get a second shot, as we showed after January 6th. If you don't get a third shot, for people who are curious, a buddy of mine collected some of these, 18 U.S.C. 1505, 1519, 2071, Federal Records Act, then you get 5 U.S.C. 552, the E-Government Act of 2002, the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act, the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, 18 U.S.C. 208, 18 U.S.C. 205. There's a ton of them, and each of them have various penalties with them, and each record could be an offense, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of records. Like I said, this is not a time of hall monitors; it's a time of revolutions. So. If it moves back toward the time of hall monitors, those are the crimes that we know you're committing, and there are probably a bunch of others. So I guess the advice would be your revolution better work.
I wish we had your Lenin book behind us.
Right.
I actually looked back there to see that there. We'll have to put it back up.
Yeah.
But anyway,
right.
that's
I feel like
the right prism here.
I feel like Kerensky being like, the provisional government authority here is duly constituted by the Duma, and you are not able to just take power.
Producer
Griffin is reading the book.
Yeah, okay.
Excellent. It's an incredible book, that biography of Lenin that was up there.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.